There was an article in New York Magazine this week which essentially confirmed that Donald Trump is in fact running for president in 2024. And he tried to stop himself from confirming it, but, Donald Trump is not one to be able to hold himself back. So we're just going to read a little bit of an excerpt here. Look, Trump said, I feel very confident that if I decide to run, I'll win. And then the writer of the piece says, I fixated on if I decide. Trump is less a politician than a live-action mythological creature, and so punditry and all of the standard forms of analyses tend to fail. What would factor into such a decision for such an unusual person? Well, in my own mind, I've already made that decision, so nothing factors in anymore. In my own mind, I've already made that decision, he said. He wouldn't disclose what he'd decided. Not at first, but then he couldn't help himself. I would say my big decision will be whether I go before or after, he said. You understand what that means? His tone was conspiratorial. Was he referring to the midterm elections? He repeated after me, midterms. Suddenly, he relaxed, as though my speaking the word had somehow set it free for discussion. Do I go before or after? That will be my big decision, he said. He was thinking aloud now. I just think that there are certain assets to before, he said. Let people know. I think a lot of people would not even run if I did that, because if you look at the polls, they don't even register, most of these people. And I think that you would actually have a backlash against them if they ran. People want me to run. All right, so there are a couple key takeaways from there. Number one, he's going to run. That is basically an unofficial confirmation that he is in fact running. And in his mind, he thinks the benefit of doing it before the midterms is to potentially box other candidates out, right? Basically scare people like whoever, Mike Pence, Marco Rubio, right? All these sort of smaller candidates out of the running. I believe Ron DeSantis would probably run anyway, even if Trump decided to run, but that would be something they would have to work out. I mean, look, it would be in the Republican Party's interest not to have a knockdown, drag-out fight for the nomination. Now, as an online YouTube political commentator, it would be in due dissidence's interest to have a knockdown, drag-out fight. I mean, Anis, you and I and Russell, we could have a lot of fun covering those debates.
We want that. Yeah,
absolutely. Yes, I'm all for that. I'm all for that. But I think Trump's idea that he can sort of preempt these other candidates from getting in by declaring early is a somewhat rational strategy. However, I think the other side of this is that it is in the Republicans' interest to keep him out of the running until after the midterms, because you're already seeing developments in these midterms where the Republicans are poised to do very well in the House. They will run the table in the House. They're going to gain dozens, if not scores of seats in the House. But, as you and I, Anise, have talked about offline, there's a possibility they may have overplayed their hands in some of these statewide races. And not just the Republican Party, but sort of the institutional right as a whole, including the court, right? The overturning of Roe, all of these mass shootings going on now. You have candidates like Herschel Walker who have no business running for Senate, just sort of, throwing their hats in the ring, winning these nominations. And so if you have Trump now, that is yet another 20-yard pass that you're throwing right over the middle of the field when all you have to do as the Republican Party right now is protect the ball and run the ball. If you're up by 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter, your job as a football coach, as a quarterback, is to sit on the ball, run the ball, and let the clock run out so you win. And they seem to be taking a lot of chances that could cost them big in some of these statewide races. Like I said, they're still going to win the House. But you want a midterm election always. If you are the out party, you always want the midterm elections to be a referendum on the in party, especially if the in party is as unpopular as the Democratic Party, and especially if the president is as historically unpopular as Joe Biden is. And so on the one hand, if Trump gets in early, it could, like he said, scare a lot of other candidates out of the race, which would prevent a really heated primary. But on the other hand, you jeopardize their chances in the midterms. And the other thing that I think is extremely risky about Trump declaring before the midterms is now the midterms become a referendum on him to the point where if the Republicans underperform in some of these statewide races, governor's races, Senate races, as they very well might, Democrats might very well win in places like Pennsylvania, Arizona, Wisconsin, Georgia, even Ohio. That's going to be a little tougher, but I think Tim Ryan has a chance to beat J.D. Vance in Ohio. If the Democrats win some of those Senate races after Trump announces, that really hurts Trump's brand and hurts his chances at winning a contested fight for the nomination. So what's your take on that?
Well, let's take a step back a little. I'm still not sure that Trump has decided to run or is going to run. And that may sound odd coming from someone like me who actually wants him to run, who predicted he would run and do really well in 2016. I mean,
You predicted he'd win in 2016 before anybody else. It was basically you and Michael Moore were the only two.
Right. Nobody else was willing to go, that far. And in 2020, I predicted he would win. And I think had it not been for the pandemic, and even with that unusual circumstance, he came very close. So it might sound odd coming from me that I'm not yet convinced. And I think at this point, I only have intuition to go by. I just cannot visualize him in 2024 in the White House. I can't see that for whatever intuitive reason. And you could say, well, everything that he's been doing in the last year and a half since he left office, supporting all these candidates at all different levels of government, getting his people in the governor's races, in case there's like dogfight in the 2024 election, and it's very close calls in certain states. He's putting his people in place everywhere. Why is he doing that if not to run? I'm still just not sure. And I did read the New York Magazine article when it came out very carefully, and Politico had something. And even before that, I think at the end of June, Alex Jones said, well, he's going to run on July 4th. I've got confirmation. And it didn't happen. So Trump's mind, I do agree with you. That's the kind of calculation going on in his mind, because he's, first of all, I think had it not been for Ron DeSantis' challenge, he doesn't care about Mike Pence and Pompeo and Cotton. I mean, these small fry, I don't think he's not even thinking about.
No, they're not a threat to him, no.
Right. But DeSantis is a real threat, much bigger than anything he faced in 2016. This is a different threat because he claims to be America first, and he can plausibly make an argument that I'm America first and Trumpist without Trump's baggage. I don't think that he's Trumpist in the sense that Trump is, but that's a different discussion. But he could make that argument, right? So had it not been for DeSantis, I think Trump would have waited until, if he was going to run, he would have waited until after the midterms, because there's a couple of dangers, as you point out. One is they'll do really well in the House, but what if inflation isn't as bad, the economy isn't as bad, which I actually think is going to be, and which means that some of his Senate endorsements like Oz and, you mentioned Herschel Walker and maybe even J.D. Vance, if they don't win, then he looks bad because the Republicans could say, well, look, you know what? He's a person of the past. We were going to win the House anyway. And he couldn't pull his weight in these, these difficult governors and Senate races and so on. So that could weigh heavily against him and give Ron DeSantis, after the midterms, real balance to come in and say, hey, you know what? I'm the man of the future. So that's one thing. On the other hand, let's say that Biden continues doing as poorly as he's doing. The war in Ukraine keeps going south as it is. Inflation stays as bad or even gets worse, which all seem strong likelihoods at this point. Then there's a great advantage in Trump declaring early in September or whatever before the midterms, because let's say that they do really well, the Republicans in the Senate and all these races, then Trump is in a really, really strong position. And so he doesn't want to lose that advantage, which he would, abdicate if he waited too long. And the important thing is to push DeSantis out now, because DeSantis is also going after some of these same donors, right? But there's yet another danger, which is that if Trump declares, then it's not like DeSantis is just going to be quiet. He's going to make his own moves. And I agree that DeSantis is going to run regardless. This is his time, his opportunity, right? What is he going to do? You can't wait too long. And I know that the polls show that Trump is pretty much ahead, although some have shown narrowing or DeSantis even doing unexpectedly well. But
Trump is still ahead by quite a bit, though. I just want to make that known. So in the national
general,
polling, Republican primary
right,
polling, Trump is between 50 and 60, and DeSantis is between 10 and 18. So
or 20 something, or not even 30, right? And so
far under 30. I haven't seen a single poll of DeSantis above 20. I'm not saying that doesn't exist. I'm just saying I haven't seen it.
I think I've seen something is in the high 20s, like, and Trump like 50 or something.
Okay, well, he's at least 25 points back.
Right, he is. So the New York Times and the liberals are trying to spin it as, oh, half the Republicans don't want Trump. But no, the other way to look at it is half or more than 50% want him, and the others are split. Like some have single digits, some have like a 5-10%. DeSantis is the only one, even maybe half of Trump's support or less than half, right? So the other way to put the headline on that would have been, wow, Trump still gets majority support among Republicans, right?
Well, the other strong caveat, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that's okay.
No, the other strong caveat to that poll is that the people who don't want Trump, most of them don't want Trump, not because they don't like Trump, but because they're worried that Trump can't win because of all the January 6th stuff. It's like, these are people who would line up to vote for Trump at 5 o'clock in the morning if he were the nominee. There's not like a DeSantis or bust contingent in the Republican Party. Like, the people who don't want Trump as the nominee probably don't want Trump for like prudential reasons. Like, yeah, he's our guy, but they're destroying him in the press now, and he's got too much baggage. We're probably better off going with a DeSantis type, right?
Right, but the question
that's not necessarily an indictment of his popularity.
Right. The question is his floor 50% something or 35% something?
Exactly.
That's the thing that Trump is thinking about. And what I was going to say is, it's easy now to say, oh, DeSantis doesn't really do well in all these head-to-head polls. But once you put him on a stage with him, I know people in the Republican Party know DeSantis, but they have not seen Trump go head-to-head with him as they have saw with, let's say, Chris Christie or Jeb Bush. It could go either way. It's more likely that Trump could just blow him away. And he has his way of doing that, putting people in their place, humiliating them. He won't humiliate him like he did with Ted Cruz or Mark Rubio or Jeb.
Right.
But he will do it in some way, and to put him in his place, like, because he basically, Trump raised him from, he was not going anywhere, and he became a national figure thanks to Trump. It's the direction of power.
And Trump has been very, very keen to point that out at every opportunity, too.
Right. And he was like,
I created Ron DeSantis, right?
Like, Ron, who are you?
Right.
When you were nowhere, I picked you from obscurity. So he has his ways of doing that. But on the other hand, if it turns out that the January 6 hearings, which, by the way, are all about disqualifying Trump, scaring him away, threatening him implicitly with, not that they're going to pursue a criminal indictment or anything, but that's the whole point of the show. The show trial is to disqualify Trump and to just keep him out, right? So what if some people have been persuaded and his ceiling is actually a little lower than we think? And something like what happened to Bernie Sanders, the Sanders, I think, was thinking, well, with 35%, that's going to be enough for me to just, sail through. And for a long time, it was working out. Trump did pretty much the same thing in 2016, right? Because there were too many candidates. But now if you've got Ron DeSantis and everybody congeals around him and it really becomes head to head, then what if you can see how this could, when it becomes concrete and people say, well, you know what? Okay, he sounds Trumpist enough to me, America first enough to me, and maybe I'll go with him. So that's the danger that, Trump is thinking about.
Well, yeah, there's going to be a whole different dynamic in this Republican primary. Let's say it's just DeSantis versus Trump, which is basically what it will be, right? Those other candidates are third, fourth, fifth tier. They're going to be gone well before Iowa, right? They're not even going to factor in, right? So if it becomes basically a DeSantis-Trump race, DeSantis knows that he cannot go nuclear against Trump the way that, like, Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio and every Republican went nuclear against Trump in 2016. Don't forget, in 2016, the Republicans viewed Trump very similarly to the way the Democrats viewed Sanders, which is that they wanted this guy the fuck out. Right? To the point where they didn't really care if it hurt the party permanently to get him out. And that's why you had the Never Trump movement within the Republican Party. You had Mitt Romney go up on stage and say, listen, if you live in Florida, vote for Rubio to stop Trump. If you live in Indiana, vote for Ted Cruz to stop Trump. Like, we don't care. We are explicitly just trying to force this guy out. They're in a position in 2024 where they cannot do that, right? You cannot shit on the former president who has a 95% approval rating within your own party, right? So they can't. So what DeSantis's message is going to have to be is going to be a fairly benign and, just sort of mild message, which is, yeah, I like Donald Trump because, DeSantis and Trump were very, very close, right? I like Donald Trump just fine, but it's time to pass the baton because he's got too much baggage at this point. So even though we like him, you got to vote for me.
Right. Yeah. So he'll be inherently constrained and severely constrained in that primary from attacking Trump on anything substantive. He can't go after him on any single policy agenda. I mean, he can't say, well, this is not like Mitt Romney that he's going to be softer on immigrants or border or something, on trade, on any policy issue. He can't. So if you agree 100% with Trump's policies, which he has to, because he's so popular with the base of the party, then all you can go after is Trump's personality. And that's something that Trump can deal with. And even, many people might say, well, you know what? I don't think that's disqualifying, not in the Republican Party for many people, right?
Well, personality and also electability, which is largely a function of personality, right? He can say, he can make the electability argument, which is like, look, yeah, we all like Donald, but Donald's got too much baggage. He's a high-risk candidate. He can lose to whoever the Democrats put up, which is going to be our next segment, so we'll get into that in a moment. But, he can lose. I'm, a little bit more mainstream just in the way I carry myself and my personal history and things like that. I'm an Ivy Leaguer. Trump is technically an Ivy Leaguer too, but, with the Wharton stuff. But anyway.
It's fictional Ivy League.
Right, a fictional Ivy Leaguer. Right. But, I've got a more sort of, mainstream type resume. And so, perhaps I'm the better candidate. And who knows, that might actually work this time because Trump in 2016, he fed on the negativity of that primary. Right. He relished in Little Marco, Lion Ted, whatever. What did he call Jeb Bush? Low energy Jeb. Right, exactly. That made him more popular. That made him stronger. Whereas if it's a nice primary, if this reads more as just like an intramural fight between two guys who more or less like each other, there may be enough Republicans out there to say, hey, you know what? Maybe first priority is beating the Democrats and maybe Trump is too weak. And I don't think that's going to happen. I'm just saying that is something to look out for because the whole dynamic is going to be different. Ultimately, it's hard for me to imagine Trump losing the nomination, though, because he's just got too big a lead. And don't forget, too many people in this country don't pay attention to politics that closely. He's the former president. That means he's got a huge advantage just in the same way that Joe Biden had a huge advantage in the Democratic Party by simple virtue of the fact that he was a former vice president. That's hard to beat. And former president is hard to beat, especially as things deteriorate under Joe Biden, because then the natural instinct that a lot of people have, not just Republican primary voters, but all sort of low information, just sort of mainstream average Joe voters is, well, this sucks. We should go back to the way it was. And the way it was is when Trump was president, right? And so just that, those are macro dynamics that I feel are just in his favor. And I don't think Ron DeSantis can get enough wind at his back to overcome that. He can make it close. He's a very formidable opponent. He is a talented politician. There's no doubt about that. He's a smart guy. But I don't know if he can get over the top. I think what makes the most sense from the Republicans' point of view is for them to work out something before the primary where DeSantis says, okay, I'll run to make it look like we have a challenge. We'll be nice. Pick me for VP after, and then I'll run in 4 years when your term
2028.
Exactly. Yeah. That would be the smart move. Now, this is the Republican Party we're talking about. So just because that's the smart move doesn't mean that's the thing they're going to do.
No, but the Republican Party is more likely to do something like that, a smart move like that. And they have,
Well, look, I
history.
mean, no argument there. Smarter than the Democrats. Look who the
Right.
Democrats picked to succeed Biden, Kamala
Right.
Harris, who is a
The
total
worst
zero.
possible choice. Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there is the poll that says that Biden does beat Trump. So DeSantis could go with that. I agree completely with you that it's going to be really difficult for DeSantis. And he's the only guy who's got even a shot at this, a remote chance to overcome this hurdle. And the other thing is that I think people intuitively understand, we're talking about Trump's personality as baggage, but the Republican hardcore base, Trump's people understand intuitively. Again, they may not be able to put it in a policy framework, but I also agree with this. Trump is the only real America First and nationalist guy out there. DeSantis is not in the same league. He can say some of the things, and I know he's used executive power to enforce some culture war things in the classroom and with corporations and so on. But the essence of America First nationalism or Trumpism is first and foremost trade and immigration, and secondly, no involvement in foreign wars. So disengagement from our alliances and NATO and all that. And you can see that someone like DeSantis, which is why I think the Republican Party would be so much more comfortable with him. I mean, ideally, they would just have him, right? Because they would get some of the hardcore MAGA base, but he wouldn't do any of this threatening stuff in terms of trade, immigration, China, NATO. He could go along with the wars. I mean, the strongly anti-war and this insanely anti-NATO, all this stuff, right? You can only get that from Trump. Immigration the same way, trade is the same way. Now we can talk about whether Trump went far enough or not. Mostly he didn't when he was president, and he had a chance to act on these nationalist policies, right? But the fact remains that I think he's the only genuine person who, on either side, I mean, when he talks about the deep state, fake news, meaning he hates the whole elite establishment, that is not DeSantis. That ultimately is not DeSantis. He tries to play that game, maybe in a way that, Oz does it in even more fake way, right? Because that's not who Oz is, right? But there's only one genuine, America First guy. That's Trump. And I think the base recognizes that, and they can feel that, and they go, yeah, you know what? That guy's a real motherfucker. I don't care about the baggage. They're not the liberal elite who get offended by tweets or whatever. And the other thing is, I think the Republican Party would rather that he wait until after the midterms, let them win. And if he wants to run, fine, run on the economy that supposedly they had under Trump, right? And not talk about the what they call the big lie or the stolen elections so much. And I think to some extent Trump will do that. I mean, he has to, right? But I think that alone could be a winning strategy, because if he just keeps talking about inflation and how bad the economy is, and look how, they've just run the economy to the ground, they don't know how to do it, and it's going to take me to take us back to where we were before, right? That should be, a very strong message. And DeSantis can't run on that because he never was president. I mean, how that was a Trump economy, right? So isn't that a built-in, as long as the economy stays bad, that I think is Trump's biggest selling point. He could just talk about that and say, you know what? We had it really good. We were winning. We're losing. And let's go back to that.
Yeah, and look, I mean, this is where the America First message fuses perfectly with that economic message, because Donald Trump, for everything he is, and, I'm a leftist. I stand against, just about everything Trump is for, right? But one of the things I will say about Donald Trump is that I believe that he actually wants the U.S. economy to thrive. I think he wants that.
Right.
He wants the country to prosper. Now, does he give a shit about everybody in the country? Of course not. Is he an asshole? Is he a bigot? Is he this? Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Is he a con man? Absolutely. But he wants good numbers, because good numbers are good for ratings, even if it's just purely selfish, right? He wants the country to do well, whereas he can point to a guy like Biden and very accurately claim that Joe Biden doesn't give a shit if the country does well. If Joe Biden cared about the U.S. economy, he would have found a way to stop this war in Ukraine.
Sure.
Right? I mean, obviously. That is so obvious. And so the fact that he didn't is proof that, no, they are perfectly willing to sell out the middle class and the working class of this country to their global interests.
Agenda, their hegemony, their empire. And they're clearly said, Biden is saying, as long as it takes $6, $7, $8 gas.
Right. This is about the liberal world order. We covered that segment. Yeah.
Right. Fuck you. I don't care. As long as it takes. He said that. And Bill Clinton, every single day, he would talk about the economy. He was an asshole, and he put in place the whole neoliberal framework for the entire world. But every single day, and he also was sincere in terms of the economy thriving, whatever distorted, weird understanding of the economy he had. Trump, too, every single day he would talk about the stock market. Every single day he would say, well, look at the stock market. We're doing well. Now, that's a ridiculous measure. But the fact that he was talking about that every day for 4 years, right? And you never hear Biden even rhetorically talk about this stuff. They're so out of touch that they're thinking, you know what? The Ukraine war, that's what the country cares about. January 6th, that's what the country cares about. Let's give him that.
Well, on a certain echelon, yes, I think that's what they care about. I think that's what they think. They think that this matters to people. Right. On an echelon above that, I mean what I said earlier. I don't think they give a shit. Their answer to the middle class and the working class and the poor people is basically too bad. Too bad. We have to funnel tens of billions of dollars worth of weapons into Ukraine because this is about maintenance of the unipolar world, and that's what's most important to us. What you pay at the gas pump doesn't matter fuck all to anyone in this White House or at this Pentagon, State Department. No. You guys are just going to have to deal with it.
Right.
You know, that's what they've said. I mean, I'm not reading into this here. I'm not reading between the lines. That's what they've said over and over again at every opportunity.
Every day to say, that's the message. We don't give a fuck about you economically. And they're expecting to win elections with that message. Right. And the fact is that Biden was brought in. All this hysteria about Trump and kids in cages and tweets and all this bullshit and grabbing pussy and all that stuff. It was all about returning the U.S. to this global hegemonic status and unleashing the Pentagon and the State Department and regime change, all the stuff that they've been doing since the end of the World War, right? The whole point to bring in Biden was to restart all that stuff, and they did it, right? They're doing it now in front of our eyes, right? So how could they not do this stuff? There's a smart way to do it, though. I mean, they could do it, and if it was somebody like, say, Bill Clinton, right? You could see how this could be packaged as, you know, in our best interest. But these people are not even at this point trying to do that. And I think partly it's because their own meritocratic liberal base is completely, doesn't even need to be convinced. I mean, they think that they've got them in their pocket so much that they don't even need to make a rhetorical case for why this kind of enforcement of the global order is ultimately helpful, you know, to the economy domestically. They're not even trying to make any kind of a case like that. But this is why he was brought in, and he's doing what he was, what he came in to do, and that was ultimately the reason they got rid of Trump. That was it. That was the point, is to just bring all the shit, the militaristic stuff, back.
Please clap.